Good evening. I've just been thinking of democracy and the previous turnouts of eligible voters, especially in the last referendum that we had. And I think the turnout was about 54%, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was in around the 50s, maybe the 60 mark, right? So you have almost half of those eligible to vote in this country who've become, for whatever reason, they're not turning out to vote. They become so disillusioned with the idea of politics and government in this country that they admit defeat. They've adopted this learned helplessness approach, and they don't believe that their voice has anything to contribute in terms of turning things around or making things better. They've just accepted it, that things are just going to plod along the way they always have been, in their lifetime at least, and there's no remedy in it, right? You couple that then with, I suppose, some of the fallout from the referendum and the local elections, and you've seen that there was a lot of vote splitting amongst the more nationalist inclined candidates. So you have 3 nationalist candidates from different parties or independents running, and people who are voting and are more inclined to be of that persuasion. The votes were split between the 3, which would have allowed people from Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil or Social Democrats or whatever the case is to get the predominant amount of first preference votes, right? So what you'd expect to see then, if you were looking at Irish people whose aim it was to get into power, to start implementing policies and running this country in a way that was more favourable to the average Irish person, you'd expect them to be able to coalesce, circle the wagons around a central pillar and a central idea, and be able to put egos aside and be able to recognise, look, this person is more capable than I am in certain areas. In the areas that matter in terms of getting elected, this person has a little bit more about them than I do. Therefore, I will back this person, always keeping an eye on him. It doesn't mean you worship him or honour him. It just means backing them, right? And pulling yourself out for the greater benefit of everyone, right? If that exists, okay? If that's not just words, right? Because it's easy to say those things. Like it's easier to fight for your ideals than it is to actually have them or embody them or act according to them, right? So it's easy for people to say, yeah, look, I'd put my ego aside and I'd allow other people to run if I felt that they were more capable than I am. Or it might be the case that people really, really believe in themselves and they believe that they are the person to lead in the future, right? Or to get us out of this, or to take the greater steps towards a better Ireland for Irish people. But I'm yet to see that, all right? And I'm sure, look, there's loads of conversations going on in the background, but I'm yet to see that manifest into something that we could all hitch our cars to, right, and follow on. Especially with the election, looking at the papers and the polls, it would not surprise me if there was one called in December, before Christmas, right? Like, people be busy with Christmas, to be stressed. The last thing on their mind is probably going out voting, right? So you're going to get it. Look, in this government, for this government, new voters are a disaster for them, because more than likely, if you've new Irish voters, it means they're more than likely going to be voting against the status quo, right? Because those that support the status quo are already represented, they're already there, and they're already voting for these people, okay? So in those two factors, you're kind of seeing, or I'm reading into it anyway, and I'm probably could be way off, but this is my sentiment, right? That you're seeing a disillusionment with democracy itself, okay? Because as Irish people, as Celts, as Indo-Europeans, whatever way you want to look at it, individualism is the hero in us, right? Rules supreme. And like, you can be aware of that, and you can recognize your limitations in that, and your strengths, of course. Or you can fall victim to the ego being dictating to you, right? Where you never believe anyone is more capable than you are, right? Even though the reality could be very different. Okay, so in addition to that, And this is nearly across the board. You see massive numbers of American politicians who are not running again. And you can see it in Ireland as well. I think there was 17 from either Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil that won't be standing again. And that begs the question of why. And this goes to the people that believe that nothing will ever change and you're never going to win, we're never going to be able to do anything about it. Because people in power have it so wrapped up and tied up, and they have it so consolidated, and they own it. They're so comfortable in their power that they own the future as well, right? If that was the case and it was such a smooth ride for all of these people, then why would so many be giving up a free ride, essentially? Right? You might say that they're doing it because they've reached the years where they can get their pension and that. And maybe so. But if they were guaranteed that it's going to be smooth sailing again in the future, sure, they'd hang on, wouldn't they? Of course they would, right? Which makes you think that their understanding and their reading of it is that it's not going to be smooth sailing in the future. And these people probably are well aware that they probably got through any of the last elections by the skin of their teeth. And they realise they're not winning another one, right? So they're pulling back. And that has me thinking then of the preparedness of the government parties the parties that are in government now at the moment. And I've been thinking this since COVID, because you read into the 2030 plan, the World Economic Forum idea of it'll be 2030 and you'll own nothing, and this was rolled out just prior to or during the lockdowns to try and customize people and acclimatize people to the idea of giving up everything, right? And it is my view that the lockdowns were supposed to last until 2030, in which case all infrastructure would have been totally changed, and it would have been absolute state control over people. Everything would have been lost. But for whatever reason, it didn't end up being that way, okay? And I believe that these government parties, and I'm basing this on their lack of preparedness for what's coming, because their way of trying to placate the modern Irish people, they're not. They're not. You know, they don't seem to have a plan B. Their plan just seems to be absolute tyranny of, we'll make it illegal for them to tell us that they don't want us. We'll make it illegal for them to critique anything we're doing. Those are the death throes of failing tyranny. They realise the game is up, right? Because I don't believe they ever thought that there would be more and more elections. You can see it in the last, or when Leo Varadkar stepped down. The murmurs from Fine Gael was that nobody wanted the job. So it just ended up being nearly Simon Harris by default, which is bizarre, right? So I thought that, given the rise of nationalism, given the rise of the recognition of this total mess that we're in, pick any layer of society and it's a car crash, along with all the car crashes, right? The desire to get cars off the road and get you out of your car, your ability to travel distances completely gone. I believe if we were locked down till 2030, that would have been done by now, or they would have been on the way towards doing that. All roads would have been designed differently. Cities would have been boxed off. They would have been horrible. There would have been no inter-town or inter-city commutes. I don't believe that would have been a thing. I believe people would have been boxed off in their little smart cities, and that would have been the absolute end of it. But we got another roll of the dice. We got out early, is the way I see it. Okay? So, what you've seen over the last few decades, if you can read back into it, or if you were savvy to it as it was happening, is you see the dialectic at play. You implement chaos, and then people naturally want, if you're fed a steady diet of chaos, on your cheat day, or to break the diet, you want a bit of order, right? So you feed them this, feed them that, and then you prepare for the swing. And then you have people in place or a party in place that's ready to grab that and harness that energy from the people. And then it's just, you swap places and you just play the seesaw game or the pendulum game, right? You play the dialectic. But there doesn't seem to be the counter to this dialectic at the moment from the system. Anyway, yeah, from the system anyway, because from my reading of history, I would have imagined to have seen a rising hero, a rising soldier of Ireland, right, who's beginning to speak in real grounded, earthy, basic, and I don't mean basic as a negative, but basic as in fundamental, in a tongue that everyone in Ireland could recognise and latch onto and listen to. A real man of the people sort of a thing, right? A man for all layers of society. I expected to see that kind of person being cultivated already from the system, although he'd be painted as someone who's outside of it, a bit of a radical or a bit of an independent, right? But I'm not seeing that, which befuddles me, to be honest, because I'm looking at what could come from all of this. And it seems that those who've got fat off the very system seem to be given up on the system altogether. You see so many politicians walking away, and the ones who are left here just continuing to plough ahead with these stupid policies that are only creating the one type of reaction in people, which is disgust, disdain, agitation, frustration, rage, hatred even, right? And their only response is, we'll outlaw that, we'll make it illegal to be hateful. Right? That's their only response. So these people that are retaining their positions are probably highly compromised, right? It goes without saying. They openly devote themselves and declare their allegiances to organisations and bodies that are external to Ireland. They wear their little badges, they go to their meetings, and they implement policies that are exactly in line with what these overseas organisations want and have spoken about for about 80, 90 years at this point, right? 100 years even. So that's no secret, okay? And it's not controversial to say that. These people's allegiances are not at a national level. They are on a supranational. They don't believe in national anymore. They don't believe in that backward idea of sovereignty, right? This kind of nonsense. So, given the sentiment that's been evoked from people, the average Irish person, I don't see the snare from the system unless it's within these parties that are already there, in which case they are not doing a very good job of capturing the imagination and the will of the average Irish person. I'm not seeing it, right? So I think we've a free run at this, provided we can get our ducks in a row and be able to delineate to people what it is we're running from and what it is we're running to. Okay? Because I think the danger of whipping people up, because the hope in a lot of people is that things become so difficult and so bad and so blatant that most people in Ireland will go, you know what, we need to try something. I will register to vote and I will try and have a say. I will make sure I get down. And then those who are already registered will see the writing on the wall and they will go, you know what, we need a change as well. But the danger in that is the votes out of frustration and anger is they tend to be related to a single issue. So you get like single issue voters who will vote for the warrior hero type of person, whether it's legitimate or whether it's manufactured, okay? So nearly either way, we're going to end up having to vote for a tyrant or a dictator even. A dictator is a better word. Because dictator is not innately bad, right? Because I think we're so deep in this swamp or this quagmire that it will take a really, really strong individual to get in and to pull things in line, to get things moving in a direction that is oriented towards something positive and something good. I'm not opposed to that, right? Even though it goes against my own nature, my own character. But it's difficult to see a way out of that, like, you know, because you see this, the schooling system, the education system. If we are to redirect things in a more beneficial way, there's so many, nearly all teachers are going to have to be re-educated. Nearly all Gardaí, based on their behaviour over the last few years, are going to have to, they nearly just lose their jobs automatically. How many in the armed forces as well, who are locking people up in hotels? How many of them do you retain? Right? How many of those in the HSE, those in the governmental departments, all that sort of stuff, how many of them can you actually hold on to without a really, really strong hand? All right? So it's a difficult one, and I wonder if we are on the cusp of a radical reformation of how countries are run. And it might be a case of disbanding any sort of centralised authority and giving it back to counties, to districts, to provinces maybe, right? Start building it from the ground up, because what we have is top-down rule from Dublin and outwards, right? When, like, what, some guy living in the mountains of Kerry or living at the base of a mountain in Kerry, like, not to use Kerry as the Kerry man thing, but nearly anywhere outside of Dublin, like, what policies that are good for Dublin might not necessarily be good for other people around the country, right? So should their say at a county level not be equal to or more, or worth more than a Dublin ruling or policy, right? So I don't know. I think we're in for interesting times in the next few years, and either way, there's going to be some serious cleanup in this country, and there needs to be. And I wonder how much it took a few decades to get us here from any sort of Ireland or any sort of way of living that would have been recognised to Irish people 100 years prior, right? Minus the trinkets, but the worldview. So I wonder how fast you can change that without shattering people's minds altogether. Right, so it's an interesting one. But I think we're probably on the cusp of seeing a real change in how the government structure. And I think it'll be more of a ground up sort of a thing. And an example of that then is Donald Trump with the Roe v. Wade thing, right? So the case that there's a constitutional right for abortion in America. So what he done was he made that not a federal issue, which means it's not a government decides for the rest of the country issue. I'll now give that back to each state, and each state can decide what they want to do with that, whether they're going to vote that in or not as a yes or a no. You know, that's an example of it, from changing from the top down to the bottom up. And I think not only do I think that's better, but I think it's probably what's inevitable, to be honest with you. So whatever your thoughts are, throw them down there, and we'll see. We're not going anywhere anyway, are we? So we'll have to see it out. Good luck.